Welcome back to the deep dive. We are really glad you're here with us today, because today I want to transport you back in time for just a second.
Oh boy, where are we going?
The year is 2010. You're a teacher, or maybe a school principal, and you walk into the vendor hall of one of those massive education conferences.
Oh, right, the kind with the endless tote bags and the ridiculously bright fluorescent lights.
Exactly. And you are just absolutely bombarded. I mean, everywhere you look, there are stacks of books, shiny brochures, expensive training manuals, and they are all promising the silver bullet solution to really one of the biggest, most persistent challenges in American schools.
How to teach English learners.
Right.
It really was an absolute publishing explosion around that time. I mean, in 2010 alone, there were something like 15 major books released on this exact topic.
Wow.
Yeah, it felt like the industry had finally cracked the code. There was this relentless stream of guides and articles and reports just flooding the zone.
So, you grab a stack of these books, you take them home, you start reading, and you would assume, with all that paper floating around, that we must have this figured out, right?
Yeah.
Like, we must know exactly what works based on cold, hard science.
And that is the paradox. That is really the hook for today's deep dive. Because if you actually looked for the footnotes in those books.
That actual proof.
Exactly. If you dug for the empirical research backing up those methods, you would find that the cupboard was almost totally bare.
Which is, frankly, a little terrifying, considering the massive scale of what we were talking about here.
It is. We are working from a really comprehensive review today by the researcher Claude Goldenberg titled Unlocking the Research on English Learners. And he lays it out pretty starkly.
Yeah, the numbers are huge.
We have over 5 million students in U.S. schools classified as English learners. We have this massive industry selling solutions. But when you separate the intuition from the actual evidence, we know significantly less than we pretend to.
And before we get into the whole, what works and what doesn't work, we really have to set the stakes for you. Because this isn't just about kids getting good grades on a Friday spelling test.
No, not at all. This is about a demographic shift that essentially defines the future of the country. Many of these 5 million students are in lower resourced environments, and the bar for them has been raised dramatically by the shift to standards like the Common Core.
Right, and I feel like Common Core gets thrown around as a political buzzword so much. But in this context, what does it actually mean for a student sitting at a desk?
It means a major shift from recall to argument. In the old days, you might get by with bubble tests. Pick A, B, or C.
The easy stuff.
Right. But the new standards require students to read complex nonfiction texts in history, science, and math. They have to analyze, synthesize, and actually argue a point.
So if you're an English learner, an EL, you're not just trying to learn the English word for photosynthesis. You're trying to read a complex paragraph about biological processes in a language you literally don't speak yet, and then argue why it matters.
Exactly. It's a double cognitive load. You are learning the language and the content simultaneously. And Goldenberg's main argument here is that we cannot just throw a laundry list of unproven tips and tricks at a challenge this big. We need to look at what actually moves the needle on student achievement.
So our mission today is to cut through all that noise. Goldenberg identifies 3 core principles that actually have a solid research footing. Not just things that feel good, but things that have actual data behind them.
We've got 3 buckets to fill today. First, what works for everyone? Second, what specific supports do ELs need? And third, the third rail of education.
Oh yeah, the heavy stuff.
The role of the home language.
Let's start with that first bucket, Principle 1. Generally, effective practices are likely to be effective with ELs. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. This sounds like a total cop-out. Just teach better? Thanks, I'm cured.
It sounds like a platitude, doesn't it? Good teaching is good teaching. But Goldenberg pushes back hard on that cynicism. He points out that for decades, the education system treated English learners as if they were a completely different species who needed a totally separate pedagogy.
Like they needed a separate classroom with separate rules and separate physics or something.
Precisely. But the data shows that the structural pillars of a good lesson are universal. If you look at the research on what helps any kid learn, it's things like clear goals and objectives. If a native English speaker is confused by a disorganized lesson, imagine how an English learner feels.
They're completely lost.
I totally adrift.
Because they don't have the linguistic bandwidth to guess what the teacher meant to say.
Right. The research highlights things like active student engagement. Not just sitting and passively listening to a 40-minute lecture, but doing things, talking, writing, moving around, and informative feedback.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning telling a student why they are wrong, not just that they are wrong.
Okay, so structure, engagement, feedback. Are there specific programs that prove this works for ELs specifically?
There are. Goldenberg cites established programs like Success for All and Direct Instruction.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, these are very structured, rigorous programs. They rely heavily on phonics, clear pacing, and constant checks for understanding. The research shows they work beautifully for the general population, and this is the key, they work just as well for English learners.
So if a school is failing its English learners, the first question shouldn't be, hey, what fancy new EL curriculum do we buy? The first question should be, are we actually teaching well?
That is the foundation. If the classroom is chaotic, if the instruction is muddy, no amount of special EL magic is going to fix it.
But, and I know there's a big but coming because we still have 2 more buckets to get through.
It is a very big but.
Good teaching isn't enough, is it?
It is necessary, but not sufficient. That is the consensus in the research. If you provide excellent generic instruction, ELs will learn. They will make progress. But they will not catch up to their native-speaking peers.
The gap is just too big.
The gap is simply too wide to close with standard teaching alone.
Which leads us perfectly to Principle 2. ELs require additional instructional supports. And this is where we get into the heavy buzzwords. Because if you have stepped foot in a school in the last 20 years, you have absolutely heard the term sheltered instruction.
You cannot avoid it. And it is actually rooted in civil rights law, a case called Lau v. Nichols.
What happened there?
The Supreme Court basically said you cannot just lecture in high-level English to a kid who arrived from Honduras yesterday and call it equal education. You have to make the content accessible.
So sheltered instruction is the solution. It is things like using visuals, right? Graphic organizers, that sort of thing.
Speaking clearly, using sentence frames.
Like, I agree with you because
Exactly, to help them structure their thoughts, building background knowledge before reading a text.
it makes perfect intuitive sense. I mean, if I went to a biology lecture in Tokyo tomorrow, I would desperately want the professor to show me pictures, speak slowly, and give me a translated handout. I would be completely lost without it.
Of course you would. And that is exactly why this next part of the research is so shocking. Goldenberg drops a bit of a bombshell here.
I love a research bombshell.
He reveals that while these strategies are widely recommended, universally, really, there is virtually no hard empirical data proving they actually close the achievement gap.
Wait, hold on. We have an entire industry built on training teachers in sheltered instruction.
Yeah.
We have the SIOP model, which is huge everywhere, and you are saying it doesn't work.
I am saying the proof is elusive. Take that SIOP model, the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. It is considered the gold standard for lesson planning in this field. It checks all the boxes: visuals, vocabulary support, interaction. But when researchers actually ran the numbers in controlled studies,
Just cricket.
modest effects at best. And sometimes no statistically significant difference at all between the kids who got it and the kids who didn't. There is another one called the Quality Teaching for English Learners model, QTEL.
Same thing.
Same thing, produced no significant effects on student achievement in the rigorous studies.
That is mind-blowing. How can something that makes so much common sense, like speak clearly and use pictures, not show up in the test scores?
Well, it doesn't mean the strategies are bad. They certainly do not hurt the kids. But they aren't the silver bullet we thought they were. And Goldenberg points to a specific study that shows how incredibly complicated this actually gets in a real classroom. It is the catch-22 found in the Saunders and Goldenberg study on instructional conversations.
I really want to dig into this one because instructional conversation sounds like exactly what we want happening. It's basically getting kids to talk deeply about the book, right?
It is deeper than just chatting. It is a teacher-led discussion that pushes for real analysis. Instead of asking what color was the character's hat, the teacher asks, why did the character lie, or what is the underlying theme of this chapter? It is the exact opposite of drill and kill.
Which is exactly what the Common Core demands.
Yeah.
High-level critical thinking.
Right. And here is what they found. For the students in the study who had high English proficiency, it worked like an absolute charm. Their comprehension shot up to 91% accuracy compared to the control group.
That is a massive win.
For them. But, and here's the twist, for the students with the lowest English proficiency, The strategy backfired.
Backfired. Like, they actually did worse.
Their performance trended downward compared to the control group who just had standard basic instruction, or at best, it was completely ineffective.
That is wild. So trying to engage them in a deep, complex conversation actually confused them more than just doing a traditional basic lesson.
It suggests a massive cognitive overload. Think about it. If you are struggling just to understand the individual vocabulary words, and suddenly the teacher opens up a free-flowing, highly nuanced philosophical debate, it is just noise.
You spend so much energy trying to decode the literal flow of speech that you miss the content entirely.
Exactly. You are just trying to survive the sentence, let alone debate the theme.
That is such a harsh reality for a well-meaning teacher. You think you're doing the best practice by getting them to discuss, but you might actually be leaving your most vulnerable students behind because their language skills just aren't ready for that format yet.
It really proves that English learners are not a monolith. What works for the intermediate student might completely drown the beginner.
Okay, that is a little depressing. Surely there is something in this sheltered instruction bucket that actually worked in the research. Please tell me we found at least one concrete win.
We did find a bright spot, and it is something any parent or teacher is going to instantly appreciate. Multimedia.
Yeah.
But not just putting on a full-length movie on a Friday to keep them quiet. This is a very specific study on multimedia-enhanced instruction. Teachers used short, targeted videos to anchor science lessons, right alongside read-alouds. So before reading a dense text about coral reefs, they watched a short clip of an actual coral reef.
Visual anchoring.
Right. And the results were highly significant. The EL students learned the vocabulary much faster, and they actually significantly narrowed the achievement gap with the non-EL speakers.
And it makes total sense why. A video is a universal language. You see the reef, you hear the word reef.
Oh.
You do not need a 3-sentence dictionary definition, you just have the concept instantly in your brain.
It completely bypasses the language barrier. And importantly, it didn't help the non-EL kids as much, but it certainly didn't hurt them either. It was a true win-win for the classroom.
So if I am a teacher listening to this, maybe I spend less time trying to force a complex philosophical debate with my absolute beginners, and more time using high-quality visual media to build the core concepts first.
That is exactly where the evidence points.
All right, we have to do it. We have to touch the third rail,
Principle 3. Here we go.
the home language. This is where polite school board meetings turn into absolute shouting matches. You have the English immersion camp on one side who say, this is America, teach in English, it is the only way they will ever learn. And you have the bilingual education camp on the other side who say you have to build on their native tongue or you are erasing their identity.
It feels entirely political. People usually choose their side based on ideology, not pedagogy. But remember, Goldenberg is a researcher. He does not care about the politics of the left or the right. He only cares about the data.
And just a quick reminder for you listening, we are not taking sides here either. We are just unpacking what the source material actually found. So what does the data actually say?
He cuts right through the noise. He cites 5 different meta-analyses.
Meta-analyses are the gold standard, right?
Yes, these are huge studies of other studies. We're talking massive sample sizes. And the consensus across all 5 is remarkably consistent. Teaching students to read in their home language promotes higher literacy scores in English.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that. Because the logic of the immersion crowd is usually based on time on task. If you spend an hour reading in Spanish, that is an hour you explicitly didn't spend reading in English. So how does reading in Spanish magically help your English score?
It is the concept of transfer. Think about learning to ride a bike. If you learn to ride a red bike, and then the next day I hand you a blue bike, do you have to completely relearn how to balance?
No. You just get on the blue bike and ride.
Reading is the balance. Once you learn the physical and mental mechanism of reading, how to decode symbols, how narrative structure flows, how to find the main idea of a paragraph, that skill permanently sits in your brain. You do not have to relearn how to read when you switch languages. You just have to apply the core skill to a new set of vocabulary words.
So if a kid comes into kindergarten strong in Spanish reading, they already have a massive head start.
Huge. And if we cut that off, if we ignore it, we are basically asking them to learn to ride the bike from scratch while blindfolded. Plus, there is the inherent value of maintaining the home language itself. Bilingualism is a massive cognitive and economic asset.
But to be totally fair, and we want to ensure balanced representation of all the findings here, Goldenberg does mention data that complicates this picture. It is not a total slam dunk for every single bilingual program, is it?
No, and transparency is absolutely key here. To maintain neutrality, he discusses a very rigorous study involving that Success for All program again. This time, they compared students in a bilingual education program directly against students in an English immersion program.
And the immersion kids won.
In the short term, yes. In first grade, the English immersion students actually had higher English reading scores.
Which completely fuels the argument for the English-only crowd.
It does. But by fourth grade, the difference had completely vanished. The scores were statistically negligible, they were tied.
So the tortoise catches the hare.
Essentially. What Goldenberg and many other researchers draw from this specific study is that the quality of the curriculum might actually matter more than the language of instruction. A fantastic, highly structured English immersion program will beat a mediocre bilingual program, and a fantastic bilingual program will beat a messy immersion one.
That brings us to a very practical reality. The vast majority of teachers in the U.S. are in English-only classrooms. They do not have a specialized bilingual program at their school. They do not speak Spanish or Vietnamese or Somali. Are they just out of luck when it comes to Principle 3?
Not at all. And this is actually my favorite practical takeaway from the whole research paper. You do not need to be bilingual yourself to use home language support strategies.
What does that even look like if I don't speak a word of the language?
It looks like using cognates.
Words that share a root and sound the same.
Right, like geography and geographia, or planet and planet. Explicitly pointing these out creates an instant bridge for the student. But the really powerful strategy mentioned in the text is something called preview review.
How does preview review work in practice?
You take a difficult academic concept, let's say the water cycle. You find a resource, maybe a short video, a summary sheet, or even a bilingual peer tutor that explains the core concept of the water cycle in the student's home language before the actual English lesson begins. That is the preview.
So they get the deep concept first. They truly understand what evaporation is in their own language.
Yes. Then you teach the main lesson in English. They engage with the English vocabulary while the teacher is talking. Then, after the lesson, you do a review. Maybe a quick written summary or a chat with that peer tutor back in the home language to solidify the understanding.
You essentially sandwich the English lesson with the home language.
Exactly. And the study showed this produced significantly better comprehension than simultaneous translation.
That is super interesting, because I think the instinct for a lot of well-meaning teachers or schools is to have an aide sitting in the back whispering the translation in the kid's ear while the teacher talks.
Which is actually fatal for learning the new language, because the student naturally tunes out the English entirely. They just wait for the translation in their ear. With preview review, they have the safety net of understanding the concept beforehand, so they can actually focus on the English words during the lesson because they aren't in a panic about being totally lost.
That is such a usable everyday strategy. Stop translating during the talk. Do it before and after.
It empowers the student to engage without creating a permanent crutch.
So we have looked at the 3 principles. We know good generic teaching, the structure and the feedback is the required pace. We know sheltered strategies need to be used carefully, lean heavy into multimedia, be super careful with complex discussion too early, and we know the home language is a massive asset, not a deficit, and we can use preview review to leverage it.
But
There's always a but in these deep dives.
we have to go back to the beginning, the Common Core. We have over 5 million kids. We have standards that are incredibly high. And Goldenberg includes a specific section in his research with a title that honestly stopped me in my tracks. He calls it the Inconvenient Truth.
That is never a comforting title to read in a research paper.
He quotes the source directly here. It is an inconvenient truth. We lack the knowledge base to fully prepare teachers.
Wow, that is heavy.
It is remarkably honest for an academic paper. We are asking teachers to close a massive achievement gap using high-stakes, rigorous standards, but the research community hasn't fully figured out how to do it yet. We have promising leads like the multimedia study, but we simply do not have a complete, foolproof roadmap.
We are asking teachers to build the airplane while they're already flying it. And the passengers are 5 million children.
Yes. And we cannot just tell the students, hey, wait 10 years for the longitudinal studies from the universities to finish. They're sitting in class today. They need to learn today.
So what is the actual solution? If science doesn't have the full answer yet, what do we do on Monday morning?
Goldenberg turns to Seymour Saracen for the answer. He was a famous psychology and education professor. And the answer isn't about buying a new textbook or a fancy new software program. It is about the fundamental conditions of the teaching job.
What did Saracen say?
He said, teachers cannot create and sustain the conditions for the productive development of children if those conditions do not exist for teachers.
If those conditions do not exist for teachers, that is profound.
It is entirely about time and professional respect.
Meaning you cannot just hand a teacher a pre-written script and expect a miracle.
No, because the research isn't granular enough for that. A study from a university cannot tell you exactly what to do for Maria in third period, who speaks Mixtec, loves math, but completely shuts down during reading. Only the teacher in the room can figure that out.
So the school system needs to give the teacher the actual time to act like a researcher in their own classroom.
Exactly. Structured time to look at student work, to plan, to sit with colleagues and say, okay, this preview review strategy worked great for Jose, but why did it fail completely for Sophia? If we do not give teachers the time to do that deep intellectual work, if we just jam their schedules full of teaching minutes with zero planning time, Goldenberg warns that these high standards are just a pipe dream.
That feels like a much more empowering message for educators, but also a much, much harder one for a school district to actually implement. Buying a stack of books is easy. Changing the master schedule to give teachers 2 hours of collaborative planning time, that is incredibly hard.
It is expensive, it is logistically difficult, but the alternative is just continuing to guess and hoping for the best.
It really shifts the entire focus of the conversation. We spend so much time debating the curriculum and so little time debating the calendar.
That is the ultimate condition for success right there.
You know, as we close out today's discussion, I keep thinking about that massive number we started with, 5 million. 5 million students.
Yeah.
Goldenberg refers to them in the text as having untapped vitality.
It is a beautiful phrase, isn't it?
It really is. We so often talk about these students in terms of deficits, what they cannot do, what they do not know yet, the gaps. But they are this massive source of cultural and economic energy. They are bilingual, bicultural assets for the future.
Absolutely. If we get the instruction right, they are not a problem to be solved. They're a massive competitive advantage for the country.
And here is my final thought for you to chew on as we wrap up. We spend so much political energy debating the labels, bilingual versus immersion, English learner versus emergent bilingual. It is treated like a political football. But based on what we actually learn from the data today, maybe the most radical thing we can do isn't changing the language of instruction at all. Maybe it is changing the school day itself.
Giving the people actually doing the work the time to think about the work.
Exactly. If we truly want to unlock that vitality, maybe we need to stop looking for a magic book in a vendor hall and start looking at the clock. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next time.